What is up, guys? It is the Bluebloods here, and it is award season, baby. Listen, the regular season conference championship week is over. We got the Heisman Award ceremony this Saturday, but we're going to start with our FCS awards here, man. You already know how we had to get to the FCS awards first. Talking about the Buck Buchanan Award today for the best defensive player in the country at the FCS level, while tomorrow we'll be dropping our Walter Payton Award breakdown on who I think should, take home the Walter Payton Award. And then next week, we're going to do the Jerry Rice Award and all that good stuff. Plus, our Heisman breakdown will also be dropped tomorrow as well. But let's get into the Buck Buchanan Award, man. Last year, Jordan Lewis from Southern won. This award dates back to the 90s, man. And so they released the list of the 22, 23 guys who were in the running. But let's break down the top 10 and then we'll get to our finalists. And then, of course, at the end of the show, I'll give my prediction on who I would have voted for and who I think will win the award when they announce these the night before the national championship game in Frisco, Texas. Now, in 10th place, we have Jacob Dobbs, Holy Cross linebacker, over 137 tackles, 17 and a half for loss, 9.5 sacks, 3 pass breakups, and Jacob Dobbs was really one of the leaders of that Holy Cross defense that has led them, that led them to the playoffs and led them to a huge win in the first round as well. So Jacob Dobbs was one of the best players for that Holy Cross team, and to be a top 10, finalist was a huge reward for the Holy Cross linebacker. I think this is about where he should have been, but he definitely deserves the recognition. Now, at ninth place, we had Nate Lynn, William and Mary defensive end. This guy was a problem for William and Mary. 12 sacks, 13 and a half tackles for loss, 6 forced fumbles. Has been an absolute problem off the edge this year for William and Mary, but very deserving of this ninth place finish. Then Forrest Ryan, Villanova linebacker, 131 tackles, 8.5 for loss, 4.5 sacks, 5 QB hurries, and has been one of the top leaders of this Villanova team that got a seed this year, a top 5 seed. They're still in the quarterfinals right now with a huge matchup coming up this weekend where Forrest Ryan can really, really have a chance to lead Villanova to the semifinals, which would be a huge accomplishment for Nova this year on the football field. 7 is our guy, man. We had this guy on the show, Isaiah Chambers, McNeese defensive end, 15 and a half tackles for loss, 10 and a half sacks, 5 forced fumbles, 13 QB hurries, which is one of the top marks in the nation. And our guy Isaiah Chambers comes in 7th. Man, this guy deserves all the praise in the world. Year after year, he's putting up major stats, and I'm really glad he got the recognition he deserves. Shout out to our guy Isaiah down there in McNeese. Now, number 6, Darius Joyner, Western Illinois safety. Now, give y'all a little bit of info. Darius will be on the show next week, so make sure to tune in for that, man. Darius, one of my favorite players to watch in the FCS. 142 total tackles, 7 for loss, a pick, 5 pass breakups, a forced fumble. Joyner was a problem at that safety spot, and he was all over the field for Western Illinois. And I think next year he's going to be a problem moving forward for Western Illinois. And I'm very excited to see what Joyner can bring moving forward as he transferred in from Jacksonville State. Now, the top 5 guys. At number 5, we have James Houston, Jackson State defensive end, 59 tackles, 20 and a half for loss, 14 and a half sacks, 7 forced fumbles, and a defensive touchdown. James Houston was the newcomer of the year over in the SWAC, and a lot of people thought that he potentially was snubbed as one of the guys we're going to talk about later, Isaiah Land, beat him out for the SWAC player of the defensive player of the year this year. But James Houston's a problem. Transferred in from Florida as a linebacker. They move him to DN. He had an outstanding year. And just in terms of pure overall impact, you could say he was probably top 3 in just presence on the field because that's the guy you had to game plan for coming off the edge for Jackson State. As he was really a key in Jackson State winning their first SWAC title since 2007 this year. Now, 4th, Justin Ford, Montana cornerback, 33 tackles, 8 interceptions, 8 pass breakups, 2 touchdowns, and 2 fumble recoveries. This kid was a problem for the Grizzlies, man. And listen, there's a Montana guy in the final three. I thought Justin Ford had a great argument to be in that final three. And really, in my ballot, I think he probably would have made my final three over one of the guys in the final three, but we'll get to that. But Justin Ford had an outstanding year. And next year, I think coming into the year, he's going to be one of the favorites to get back into the Buck Buchanan Award race and potentially could be a favorite to win it coming into next year. But this year had an outstanding year. It's been 8 interceptions, 8 pass breakups is crazy. Justin Ford is that guy for Montana. Now, we have our finalists, though, our top 3 finalists. You see them to my right on the ticker. Isaiah Land, Florida A&M edge rusher / linebacker, whatever you want to call him. I consider him more of a DN. Patrick O'Connell, Montana linebacker, and then also Troy Anderson, Montana State linebacker. The state of Montana is repping right now. Three out of the top 4 finishers for the Buck Buchanan Award. Let's give Montana their props. I already had to offer my apologies to Montana for picking against both of these teams in my second round preview. So I apologize for that, but let's break down these finalists, why they're finalists, kind of go into some of the accolades of why they're here. So we'll start with Isaiah Land. Florida A&M edge rusher, man, 43 total tackles, 25 and a half tackles for loss, 19 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 3 pass breakups, and 6 QB hurries. He was number 1 in the FCS in tackles for loss and for sacks this season, was the SWAC Defensive Player of the Year, had 8 games with 1 or more sacks this season, including 5 games with 2 or more sacks this year, including that 5-sack performance against South Carolina State midway through this season. And for Land, for me, he really exploded onto the SWAC scene this season. I mean, listen, he had 8 total sacks in back-to-back games against Alabama State and South Carolina State, and really was a huge part in this FAMU defense that led the Rattlers to the FCS playoffs for the first time in a long time. And they faced off against Southeastern Louisiana, ended up losing that game in the first round. But really and truly, one of his underrated performances for me came on a road in Baton Rouge against Southern. 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 2 tackles for loss that really helped the Rattlers spark that late season run they needed to get themselves in the playoffs. That game against Southern and Baton Rouge, to me, was a big trap game. Looking ahead to some of the games they had coming later, I thought that his performance in Baton Rouge was a key component in this team making it as far as they did. Now, for Land, he will be the first ever Florida A&M player to win the Buck Buchanan Award, but it could be huge for the SWAC because this could be the second straight SWAC player to win the award. Like I said earlier, Jordan Lewis took home the hardware for Southern last season. Now, for Land, how he wins really depends on what the committee's looking for. What stat holds the most weight in their votes? If sacks and tackles for loss hold the most weight, Isaiah Land has a great chance of taking home this award in January. But if they're looking for a overall level of production or like you need more than just 2 elite stats, then I think it's going to be hard for Land to find his way in there. I know that Hero Sports released their ballot and they had Isaiah Land second, but Isaiah Land, in my opinion, has a great shot at taking this award home come January due to his just overall level of dominance in terms of a pass rusher and playing in the backfield. His motor is top notch. He isn't the most physically dominant defensive end. He's like 6'4", but he only weighs about 215, 220. But his motor, where he never gives up, he's always after the ball, he's always around the ball, really has put him in a position to take home this award. Now, the next finalist, Patrick O'Connell, Montana linebacker, 91 total tackles, 19 and a half tackles for loss, 13 sacks, 5 QB hurries, 3 forced fumbles, and a touchdown. He was 3rd in the FCS in sacks, 6th in tackles for loss this season, and had 7 or more tackles in 11 games this year, along with 8 games with 1 or more sack. This guy has done it at such a high level consistently throughout the year. And O'Connell, man, for me, was one of the most reliable linebackers in the FCS. He could step down, be that edge pass rusher. He can be the much needed run stopper for this Grizz team, while also he's been such a key part to Montana making their run to the quarterfinal. And if they can get past James Madison, they can find themselves in the semifinals with a chance to play their way into a Frisco appearance, which would be huge for this program. And also, he was an integral part in Montana pulling off the upset over number 20 Washington to kick off the season. One of the biggest FCS over FBS upsets, really ultimately cost Jimmy Lake his job at Washington. But in that game, 10 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and arguably one of the biggest games of the year for Montana. I know it's not, the big rivalry or anything like that, but it still was a top 20 win for Montana, and O'Connell was one of the key pieces to them pulling that upset and shut down a Washington offense that only scored 7 points. They held a top 20 preseason FBS team, Pac-12 team to 7 points, and O'Connell was a big factor in that. He's going to be looking to become the 4th Montana player to win the Buck Buchanan Award, the first since 2019 when Dante Olson took home the award, and could be the 3rd player since 2015 following Tyrone Holmes and, of course, Olson, who took home the award in 2015 and 2019, respectively. But really and truly, O'Connell, for me, I think if they're looking at just an overall stat line where it's like you have the tackles, you have the tackles for loss, you have the sacks, you're one of the best players on one of the best teams, I think that's going to help O'Connell. The drawback, though, really is truly is Justin Ford being on that team. Could you make a real argument that Justin Ford is more deserving? I don't know. It kind of depends. But for me, I think Patrick O'Connell has a great chance to take this award home. Now, the final guy, Troy Anderson, Montana State linebacker. And I don't even know where to start with this kid. I'm not going to lie. I think Troy Anderson really doesn't get as much, he gets respect from the Big Sky people, of course, but I think as an overall FCS guy, I don't know if he gets enough shine, really. And that's partly on my fault, too. I cover the FCS, and I need to start covering some of these players better and kind of putting the spotlight on some of these guys, because Troy Anderson definitely deserves it, man. 116 tackles, 10.5 for loss, 2 sacks, 2 picks, 7 pass breakups, and a touchdown. Top 10 in the FCS in total tackles. He was the Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year. 6 games with 10 or more tackles, while having 3 games in a row with over 15 tackles, including that huge top 10 win over Eastern Washington on the road, on the red turf. And what makes Anderson such a interesting prospect, I would say, is his ability to be so versatile in what he does. In my opinion, and I'm just going to put this out there, I think he's the most versatile player in the FCS right now. He's played running back, he's played quarterback, outside linebacker, middle linebacker, box safety for Montana State. And he's probably one of the biggest game changers in the FCS right now. And teams literally have to change their entire game plan to accommodate where Anderson is on the football field, because he's 6'4", over 230, and he's arguably the fastest person on the field at any given time due to his athleticism. And his instincts and vision as a linebacker really make him hard to game plan for, in my opinion. And for me, when you look at Montana State, Anderson is the most important piece to that team right now. I mean, he's played Mike, he's played Will, he's played Sam linebacker, he's played slot corner, box safety, and like I said, he's played all the offensive positions. His versatility and athleticism cannot be overlooked. He's gonna try to become the 3rd Buck Buchanan Award winner in Montana State history, the first since 2012, 2013, when Brad Daly and Caleb Shrivas won back-to-back awards those 2 seasons. But if the way he wins this award is the eye test, really. If the voters watched the game, Troy Anderson should win this just because of his impact on the field. But stat-wise, I think, you look at the total tackles, yes, that's probably the biggest, aspect of his stat resume. But if they prefer tackles for loss and sacks over just total production and impact, then one of the other 2 guys will probably take it home. Now, to wrap up this episode, I'm going to give you my top 3, my top 5 ballot, and then or really top 6 ballot, and then we'll go with the winner. So for snubs or just missed a cut, I think I really think there's a good argument for James Houston of Jackson State, Darius Joyner of Western Illinois, and Justin Ford of Montana. If any of these three guys would have made the final three, I wouldn't have had a big problem with it at all. Houston, the same thing with Anderson, just had that impact. Yeah, the stat box is loaded with sacks and tackles for loss, but he did rank behind Landon those. But in terms of overall impact, James Houston was right up there with anybody in the country. Now, Darius Joyner, really and truly what he did at Western Illinois this year as a newcomer to the MVFC was absolutely amazing. And I think Darius Joyner moving forward needs a lot of respect. And I would not have had a problem if he would have found himself in the top 3 as well. And then, of course, Justin Ford from Montana, man. I thought personally, just because of I know it's so linebacker heavy in the top 3. I would have had no problem switching O'Connell out with Justin Ford for Montana. I think Justin Ford next year probably is going to be the odds-on favorite to win this award. And Justin Ford right now has a really good argument to be a top 1 or 2 corner in the FCS right now. I mean, this kid is a problem at the cornerback spot. Now, at 3, in my ballot with the top 3 we have, I would have put Patrick O'Connell, Montana linebacker. I think, like I said earlier, I think the drawback between him and Justin Ford splitting votes between the team is going to be concerning. And also, I think is when you look at the overall, when you look at the how one of the stat box with Isaiah Land and the overall impact Troy Anderson had, I would slide Patrick O'Connell at the 3 spot. Not no snub to him or slight to him. I think he's a great player. I just think the other 2 guys had overall bigger impacts and better statistical seasons. So I would put Patrick O'Connell at 3. At 2, I have Isaiah Land, Florida A&M linebacker. And I personally think, yes, if it was just a purely stat award, I would probably give Isaiah Land the award for his sacks and tackles for loss. But disappearing in the Southeastern game was concerning to me. And 2, I think when you look at the defense as a whole, you look at Savion, you look at Marquise Bell, there were a lot of other guys on that defense that I think really aided him. And for me, he didn't have that type of impact where you're like, okay, we have to scheme for Isaiah Land every single play. The high motor was huge. And for that, I'm going to slot him in at number 2 very closely. And for me, number 1 has to be Troy Anderson, Montana State linebacker, would be my Buck Buchanan Award winner, just because, I mean, you look at the tackles, you look at his speed, his athleticism, the impact he had on the game, even if he didn't pack the stat box in terms of sacks and tackles for loss, he was all over the field all the time. And when you're watching a Montana State game, Troy Anderson flies off the screen, man. And I think the story fits the kind of narrative that a lot of these awards want to have. And I just think right now, when you look at pure overall impact on the game as a defensive player, Troy Anderson is number 1 in that. And if you have any doubt of that, just go watch the Montana State film and Troy Anderson will fly off the screen. So for me, I think it would be a huge disservice if Troy Anderson did not take home the Buck Buchanan Award. I think Isaiah Land is a close second, and Patrick O'Connell for Montana would be my 3rd place choice. But guys, comment below what your top 3 or 5 would be in the comments. I'd be really interested to see how you guys evaluated these prospects. We'll be back tonight with our quarterfinal previews and live predictions live tonight. We have an interview for the show at 6, so we're going to go off at about 6:45, 7 tonight to preview all the quarterfinal games and give my official predictions. So make sure to tune into that. Then, of course, more interviews coming down the pipeline, and of course, we're going to preview the Walter Payton Award tomorrow, along with the Heisman Trophy. So make sure to tune in to that. But guys, for right now on the Blue Bloods, we are out.